Well, today at the Centre for Optimism, I'm delighted to welcome Stefan Romaniw OAM. Born in Melbourne, a Ukrainian Australian, he's the co-chair of the Australian Federation of Ukrainian Organisations and the first vice president of the Ukrainian World Congress. He's been a tower of strength in garnering support for Ukraine, not just in Australia, but worldwide, and he's recently returned from the Ukraine. Welcome, Stefan. As you know, you can never get away with a visit to the Centre for Optimism without being asked the question, what makes you optimistic? So, Stefan, what makes you optimistic personally?
I think it's got a lot to do with upbringing. For me, having strong faith and trying to understand God's plan. For me, that gives you optimism, especially in times when you're down. Obviously, you can reflect and you can turn around and you say, well, okay, we've taken one step back or two steps back. But I think faith, my family, my father and mother were very optimistic people, especially my mother. My mother never saw bad in anything. She would always try and spin a good story. And the other thing that gives me optimism now is the fact that I have my own family. I have a lovely wife and two lovely children, and a son-in-law and a daughter-in-law and 5 grandchildren. And I think they give you a purpose in life. So you say, okay, this is what we're living for. So let's create a better tomorrow for them. And I think that's where the Ukrainian bit comes in as well. And I think the other, just to finish off an optimism, the Ukrainian community played and continues to play a big role in my life. I've been blessed with a community that has given me the skills to be able to move forward in life. I chaired the Victorian Multicultural Commission, and I was very optimistic about what we did then. But when I think about how did I get from point A to point B, boy, if it wasn't for the Ukrainian community that was always giving me opportunities, I don't think I'd ever get there. And also that optimism is, one other thing I'd like to say is somebody gave me this little saying the other day. When you talk about life and you talk about things, when you drink a glass of water, don't forget who dug the well.
Yeah.
So there's people who were before you, and I think they also instilled a lot of optimism.
That's an interesting conclusion, because, I'm on the board of Yarra Valley Water, and you probably drank their water this morning. And when we look at the legacy of what they laid down in the 1880s, people are still drinking from those pipes and those reservoirs that were laid down there.
But I think the message is also for ourselves in life that don't get ahead of yourself, that ultimately, you didn't create history, mate. History was created for you, and you're a custodian. So, but look, I like to be optimistic. I like to smile. I like to joke, because I think it creates a good atmosphere wherever you are.
Yeah. Dominic Barton, the head of Rio Tinto, said every great leader he'd ever met is infectiously optimistic. And Bob Iger, who heads up Disney, there's the top feature of 2020's leadership is infectious optimism. So I think you nailed that, Stefan. And every time I see you on television or listen to you on radio, you inspire me. So you recently returned from Ukraine.
Yes.
So what makes you optimistic for Ukraine for 2023?
I think it's funny. People say to you, well, you've gone to a war-torn zone. You've seen all this destruction. You continue to see it. So how can you be optimistic? And I think if you understand the Ukrainian psyche in Ukraine, people in Ukraine historically have been, able to look after themselves in times of, sad times, whether it be the 32-33 famine that Stalin created, the genocide, the Holodomor. Somehow people shared what they had. If it was only one apple, it was then divided amongst many so that people could have things. If you see Ukraine through the war and through Soviet oppression, they continued to at least understand who they were. And we're now in a situation where Ukrainians, whilst they're cautiously optimistic because nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow. I think the optimism is that we as a nation will stand strong. We will win this. And I think there are a couple of examples of that we could look at, Victor. I'll give you two examples of my most recent visit. I went to a shelter that we're in Irpin, one of the places which have been blown up, and we're working with Rotary and building, maintaining shelters. And a 92-year-old woman I go into a room to have a look, and these shelters are old government facilities that have been done up. They at least put a roof over their head. We provide them with bedding and that. And she takes me into a room, and it's a very small room. She's there with another elderly woman, and she's 92. And she says to me, when I was born, my parents dropped me very, very quickly. In other words, I've been an orphan most of my life. I have lived through the Second World War. I had an apartment, and she points in the direction where the apartment was, and it's no longer standing. And she takes me in the room, and she says, takes my hand, and she rubs my hand on the bed, on the flannel bedding, and she says, "Look at this. Look how warm this is. Look at the pillow I have, and look at the mattress I've got." And she finishes off by saying, "It'll all be good." So when you see a person like that who has, gone through life, I'll give you another example. In Lviv, when the missiles were flying, I called friends of ours, and this was the day after, and I said, how are you? And Volodya says, "My wife's outside. This is the day after washing windows of the house." I said, why are you washing windows? And she says, or he says, she decided that yesterday she was going to wash windows on Tuesday, and no Russian missile, no bomb is going to stop me doing that. And I think the optimism in Ukraine is that people, I think, again, like anything in life, short term, medium term, long term. Short term, a lot of pain. Medium term, a lot of rebuild. Long term, an existence for a country which is free, democratic, the shackles have been broken, and becomes an international, not just European leader, but a leader internationally about what life's all about. And in your space, where we're talking about optimism, why are we fighting? We're fighting values. We're fighting for sovereignty. We're fighting for independence. We're fighting for freedom. And going back to what I said before about optimism in your own family, well, isn't that what we're all fighting for? We want an optimistic future for our children. And the only way you get an optimistic future is, good has to overcome evil. And I think this is what it's about. So if you look at optimism in Ukraine, I think people have probably got in there, parked in their brains that, look, there's going to be, no pain, no gain. But at the end of the day, what is the end result? And if the end result is what we see as being, then it's a very optimistic look as to being Ukrainian, where Ukraine sits, and the future of Ukraine. You and I may no longer be here. Hopefully we will, but I'm not saying that the war is going to finish in 30 years, but ultimately, I think that's what's in the back of their minds.
So President Zelensky, and when I describe him to other people, I think he is the world leader now for freedom and democracy. He was interviewed by Fareed Zakaria, who said, "How can you be optimistic in the face of such evil?" And Zelensky said, "It's because I believe in people, the people of Ukraine and the people of the world." So, the Ukrainian people have gone through so much suffering, in Tsarist Russia, in Soviet Russia, establishing their freedom. So would you say the Ukrainians are an optimistic, persistent people?
Definitely. If in what Zelensky says about people, you would have seen, there's a lot of footage, Second World War, very, very hard. You've got to go into archives. Today, in real time, you see exactly what's happening. You see in real time, Christmas Eve in Ukraine, missiles flying, sirens sounding, people in bunkers or in their apartments celebrating Christmas. You see soldiers in bunkers at a table, not much on the table, but celebrating Christmas. You see people on the soldiers on the battlefield, small table, snow, celebrating Christmas. I think it's all about people. I mean, I don't think anybody would have anticipated the resilience of the Ukrainian people. If you watch some of the footage and you see that a Russian tank being towed by a tractor, when you see you know, a Dvir, which is like a courtyard, and the Russian soldiers have walked in, and an elderly woman and a gentleman come there and say, "Just get out of here, because this is mine. So go away." Now, you know, some people say that's crazy. You know, you get a bullet in your head. But what it basically did was showed that people are very, very resilient. And I think when he says about people, you know, anybody who knows a little bit about what happened at on the 24th, and from the 24th to early March, it was people power. It was people power. People power who basically if you go the streets of, you know, the main drags, and you see all the barricades, and you see all the tires that have been stockpiled, and the wood, and I say, where do you get all this wood? Where do you get all these tires from? And you know, the importance of those tires is the fact that if there's an onslaught, in other words, tanks or things are going, what you do is you put these barricades up, you start a big fire, you throw tires on there, and that just pushes people back. Now, that's people power. For example, the other part of, you know, we now have an army, a fairly sophisticated Ukrainian army. But one of the initiatives was to create territorial brigades. So, you know, if you lived in, you know, St. Albans, or you lived in Toorak, or you lived in Mornington, you would have formed a territorial brigade. So who were the territorial? They were the people. That was people power. People who basically, the run-of-the-mill guy come out and said, you know what, I'm not going to stand for this. I'm going to fight. They didn't have arms. Some of them never held a gun in their life. The fact is that people power, and I think where Zelensky comes from in terms of people, it is people power. You see, for example, Kherson. You see how that people power in terms of army have pushed the Russians out. You see the jubilation of those people who have been, in inverted commas, liberated. People live in hope. You know, they live in hope. If they didn't have hope, they would have put their arms down and said, they would have done what the US and others had said to Zelensky in the first day: we'll give you an aeroplane, get out. Or another country that said, you know what, you can run your country in exile from our place. That would have been the beginning of the end. But they understood that people, and I'll give you another example about people power, and that comes in different shapes and forms. When Zelensky became president, people were a little bit unsure about what the future was going to hold. He was an unknown quantity, had a big agenda, basically wanting the war to stop, which he wants now. And then traditionally, Independence Day marches are always, you know, the tanks, the flyovers, and that. Zelensky went for a different model. He went for a bit of a peace model. In other words, you know, a beautiful stage, music, and that. Parallel to that, the people power in an organized way, that's people from the armed forces and people power, organized another rally parallel. Okay, not to interfere. It was all done in a very orderly fashion, but it was people power to say, hey, we are in war. You know, yes, we want peace, but you know what? We're just sending you a message that, you know, we're not going to go for the lowest common denominator. And I think that was one of the turning points where I think Zelensky's administration understood that people power was with him. People wanted to aspire to something higher, and so there are lots of those examples where I think he realizes, and we all realize. I mean, people power. Have a look at the international community. People power. In other words, countries coming to support Ukraine. You know, you take, for example, the unexpected. You have, for example, I mentioned previously the Holodomor 32-33, and I chair an international committee for the recognition of Holodomor as genocide through the Ukrainian World Congress. You know, we started an activity in 2008. Ukraine remembers, the world acknowledges, getting countries to acknowledge Holodomor as genocide. Well, who would have thought that in 2022, Germany, of all places, its Bundesstaat would vote to recognise the Ukrainian famine as genocide.
Yeah.
So people power, and that people power that stemmed from not just members from the Bundestag. That was a lot of activity in a lot of spaces where people actively got involved. So, like anything else, people power is very important.
Yeah, no, you've absolutely nailed it. Now, I mean, your recent visit, you visited some of the cities and towns that were most damaged, you know, that people have seen on television as, you know, with proof of war crimes, and you've met with these people, your 92-year-old lady who've suffered greatly. How would you sum up their stoic resilience and what underpins it? Is it their faith? It's you know, having captured democracy after so many decades of dictatorship. What underpins that stoic resilience?
Look, that resilience, if you know, internationally, what we've tried to do, and look, I don't want to put too much emphasis on internationally, the diaspora, because diaspora does a lot of work, but ultimately it's the people on the ground in Ukraine. And the reason we go there is because we want to learn from them as to what the needs are. One of the things, you take Irpin. Irpin got, it's one of the, you would have seen all those horrific, and Bucha, where all those bodies, those 400 bodies were buried, where there was a lot of destruction. And, you know, when I was in Irpin in June, when I was in Ukraine with the Prime Minister Albanese visit, I went to visit a child's library. Okay, so imagine there's a war. You look around and there's, you know, destruction and that, and here you have this children's library, because schools are closed. Children's library on a regular basis, bringing children together, doing artwork, trying to make sure that the children, at least, and the young people, they're affected, but let's try and, you know, minimize the effect. What that basically does is it also gives a bit of an upbeat to people. In one of the shelters I was in, I was asked to play Saint Nicholas, so they dressed me up as Saint Nicholas. You know,
well, you're a good model for him.
Yeah, I got the stomach for it, so it's good. Basically what these children, what we gave them was little boxes of chocolates. Now, you know what our kids are like 50 presents, and that's not enough, you know. And I haven't got this and I didn't get that. No, I'm not saying our kids aren't appreciative, but how appreciative these children were of these small things. In actual fact, and you know, children have got their own sense of humor. And I had a girl who's probably about 10, and she said to me, "St. Nicholas, I'm so happy to see you. I'm so glad that you're here." I mean, we've already given them a present each, and she says, "Can I hug you?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So I hug her, and she whispers in my ear, "Do you have any more presents you might be able to give me?" But I think also, just to that point, if you watched some of the clips 2 days ago after the shellings, one of the houses was shelled and ruined, and the owner of that house stood outside, very upset, and basically said, "Well, today it was me, tomorrow it's going to be somebody else. What I need to do is clean up outside my house here, because it's very, very important." What we do, I mean, you'd sit there and cry, and you God knows what you do, and this is what they do, and I think when I go there, I'm so buoyed by the fact that you know, people are so resilient, and you know, and also if you go to, you know, the major cities like Kiev or Lviv or some of those other places, Drohobych, where I was to see a rehab center that we're helping fund. You know, it's life as usual. It's like here, and often people say, "Well, how come?" And I say, "Well, it's like here. We know COVID's around. We know we might get it, but we're still out there. And in Ukraine, it's a bit about the same. We know we might get shelled, but what are we going to do?" And I think that they have now understood that this is something they're going to have to live with. There is going to be more of this. But as I said to you before, I think if you look at long-term, people are saying, "Well, you know, what sort of Ukraine are we going to have when this is finished? We are going to be the champions of the world."
Yeah, I think they're already the champions. So lastly, you've been very generous with your time, Stefan.
Yeah, no worries.
Thinking of 2023, It's the second day. What message would you like to share with people who support Ukraine and would like to help?
Look, I think, again, to keep on topic, optimism. Okay, we have to be careful we don't get Ukraine fatigue. In other words, we don't think that this is all done and dusted and yeah, this is just going to keep on going. I think what we can do is we can continue, if we want to be optimistic, and the optimism will rely on us winning freedom, democracy, all those values. We need to support Ukraine. And Zelensky, in his presentation to the US Congress, I think was very clear about what we need is support, but we need it now. And the call out to governments in the first instance is we need speedy support. So we don't need statements. What we need is maybe less statements, more delivery. That's very, very important. Secondly, how do we help? Through the Australian Federation of Ukrainian Organisations, our Ukraine Crisis Appeal, we have been able to deliver about $25 million worth of donated humanitarian military aid. We have been able to raise about $8.5 million through the Ukraine Crisis Appeal. We are supporting the shelters, the rehab. When you talk about optimism, I would say there's something out of bad or something good might come. I went to a rehab center called Nazaret in Drohobych in Western Ukraine, which we're working with Caritas to fund part of it. Okay, so I call it Jesus work. This is what I like. I call it Jesus work, right? I was hungry, you fed me. I was in jail, you visited me. All that stuff. Whatever. I don't know that. I'm not a student of the Bible that I can quote Luke something.
That was pretty good though.
But when you see this place and you've got alcoholics, you've got drug addiction, alcohol addiction, you have the spin-off of that is there are children involved, therefore there are the children of people who are addicted, and these people are working with these people to try and give them a new life. We have people who are displaced. There are millions of people need to understand that there are millions of Ukrainians who are displaced in Ukraine. They moved from the east to the west or the center. That's all being bombed now. Now they've got nothing there. So, for example, there's a room full of people who are on dialysis. So they have to be taken into Lviv every week for dialysis. We have elderly people who have nowhere to go. We've got nowhere to go. Everything's lost. They spent nights on the street. They were picked up. They were brought there. When you see this sort of activity where the optimism is this, that there is a problem, and how do we fix the problem? In other words, I'm very keen on, what Einstein, I think it was Einstein who said, some people you give them the solution and they give you the problem. What we're trying to do is understand the problem and fix the solution. Are we going to fix the war situation? Well, I'm not sure that we're in a position to do that. But if you talk about optimism for 2023, the ultimate is Zelensky's 10-point peace plan. And it's all very straightforward. Putin can negotiate and the UN can talk about it any way it wants to about mediation. The fact is, pretty straightforward. Ukraine is a sovereign country, sovereign state, has its borders. Get out of Ukraine, and we can then work through what has to be worked through. And there's a lot to be worked through. And I don't think Putin, the reason he doesn't want to go for this peace plan is obviously doesn't want to get out of Ukraine, but also his premise that he's defending Russians in Ukraine is completely false, completely false. And I'll give you a couple of examples why I think it's false. Oftentimes, especially in Western commentators that talk about Russians in Ukraine. Now, there's Russians, there are Russians in Ukraine. There are Ukrainians who are Russian speakers. Two different things. Nobody in Ukraine is being penalized because they speak Russian. His argument that, Russian speakers are Russian, well, they're not. And there's evidence. How many people, he was giving away free passports. People didn't jump at that. A majority of people who Donetsk, Luhansk, those places, as soon as those guys put the little green men came in, they left because that wasn't the Ukraine that they wanted. And I think that this peace plan is about how we deal with this situation. And we only have one problem, that's Putin. And in diplomacy, as you know, Vic, you've been around, in that space. Diplomacy is about a win-win. You get a win-win situation. You got to give and take. Unfortunately, in Putin's world is I win, you lose. Yeah. So that there's not a win-win. You lose, and that's what he's going. So I'm optimistic that let's start with let's finish where we started, about faith and God, and have a look at the conversations about Christmas in Ukraine, and how smart that we have two church leaders, that is head of the Catholic Church, Sviatoslav, and Epiphany, the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, on the issue of Christmas. There's a big dilemma. It's 25th or the 7th, okay? But they're both, I met with them both, and they're pretty smart people. This is not the time. You celebrate when you want to celebrate. Yeah. And there's a strong argument why we should move to the 25th. But this is not the time to have these conversations. In the background you can, because when people say you change the date, we don't just change the date, you change the whole church calendar. But again, the optimism is that people did celebrate the way that, and nobody was pointing fingers and saying, oh, you celebrate then, or you celebrate then. I think we can be optimistic that the people in Ukraine are optimistic. The world, what can we do? We can continue to support Ukraine. We can make sure governments continue with the sanctions. We can make sure that the military aid is speedy. We can help with humanitarian aid in terms of the programs we're running. But just to bring it back to the Australian-Ukrainian community, I mean, I'm buoyed. Like I've chaired this bit of a dinosaur, chaired this federation, and hopefully 2023, the optimism is I will not be chairing it towards the end of the year. That's how optimistic I am. But I'm absolutely buoyed by the way the community has responded, and not just the Ukrainian community, but also the broader Australian community. How people on the street will stop you. This morning, for example, I went for a run this morning, and a guy stops me and says, "Oh, you're on TV yesterday, and what is the issue?" And look, just want to tell you that we support you. We've just had they're finishing off today, I think, the two youth organisations that we have, Ukrainian Youth Association SUM and the Ukrainian Scouts Plus. Collectively, one are in Sydney, a national camp, the other one's in Melbourne. Collectively, close to 600 people, young people. We haven't had that for years. We haven't had that for years. And I think people are now also very optimistic that given the situation of having new arrivals here, and we've been working with them, and if people want to help, we can continue to do that. But they've also been an injection. They've been an injection into the community. And we also, again, they want to be with their families. But the positive and the optimistic part about it is they have now populated our Ukrainian schools, our churches. There is a resurgence. There is a revival. That's also something to be optimistic about. So to finish, one, we want to see most optimistically, we want to see the war finish. Two, we want to make sure that people basically who have come through this war have the support that they need. And three, that we continue to support Ukraine the way that we can. And four, that we continue to support those that have settled here who've made Australia home, that they ultimately also feel very much part of this community and understand how important they are. And our job, in a sense, is to make sure that this whole issue of mental health and those issues are being addressed, because we're also talking about that. So, mate, we could talk about this for hours, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. And again, I just finish off by saying that when you ask the question why, I think people look at it in the long term, and the long term of this is going to be a stronger, better Ukraine, an integral part of Europe and international community, and far more revived local Ukrainian communities around the world.
Brilliant. As you know, the refugee and the migrant is amongst the most optimistic of people. Yep. And you, as the son of refugees, I think epitomise it, both for Australia and the world. So, Stefan Romaniw, thank you so much, and all strength to your arm in 2023.
As we say in Ukrainian, budimo, in other words, we are, we will win.